Hello and welcome back to yet another review. This week I will be taking a slight detour into a more contemporary artist, Kanye West, who I'm sure we are all familiar with, but I will not be talking about his most recent album, no. I will be continuing my recent theme, and by recent I mean the last month or two, of alternating albums by Genesis with albums that came out when I was a preteen and in my very early teens. And the album I will be discussing is 2008's 808s and Heartbreak. Very much like its more popular successor, My Beautiful Dark Twisted Fantasy, 808s and Heartbreak is a transitional album in the scope of Kanye, moving away from what he was in the 2000s and towards what he would eventually become in the 2010s. And the reason for that is a pretty tragic one. I'm going to keep this short because this has been talked about to death when it comes to this album. But essentially, in 2007, Kanye West was on top of the world. He had just released Graduation. It was his big pop album. He had beat 50 Cent in the charts, you know. He was unstoppable. And then, in late 2007, in the span of about 2 months, his beloved mother, Donda, who he named his most recent album after, tragically and very unexpectedly passed away from complications of surgery, and his fiancée left him. And so for the first time of eventually many times in his career, Kanye channeled the loss and anguish and depression into making 808s and Heartbreak. The sort of general critical line on this album is that it's a breakup album masquerading as a loss album, and that's not really incorrect. That is definitely what this is. To date, it is the biggest departure of Kanye's career, even more so than him abruptly retooling an album in the middle of an episode to be about Jesus of Nazareth. And as you might imagine from something T-Pain was involved with in the 2000s, this album makes heavy use of autotune. This was also the year that autotune just took over everything, and you would get autotune in songs for absolutely no reason. Because it was trendy. It would just be in songs. This album actually used autotune really well. Really get a sense of alienation from it, and it sort of prefigures the more creative uses of autotune that we would see on future Kanye albums. You know, when I made this outfit, I was kind of trying to go for Kanye's getup around the time, but I don't think I succeeded. I think I look more like somebody who would have been in front of a camera in 2008, screaming about this album, just throwing out expletives left and right, just ranting and raving about how this album has auto-tune, it's pop, it ain't like it was when I was a kid, it don't have guitars, it's not real. Anyway, let's talk about the tracks. Say You Will is moody, sparse, and atmospheric, with a lush but muted backing track featuring an 11-piece orchestra. Kanye's vocal performance here is quite striking. There's a roughness to the delivery here that I think is quite charismatic and which carries the message across very well. This track is another highlight. String bits in the opening are used very well. Like the keys, the instrumentation is excellent. The auto-tune is used really well here, and I really like Kid Cudi's bit. Now, on a lyrical level, the track features some of Kanye's best lyrics, questioning the nature and very worth of stardom, and whether the benefits and the luxury are worth the cost. Heartless is yet another fantastic track. It makes excellent use of a sample from the title track of one of the more forgotten Alan Parsons Project albums, Ammonia Avenue. The lyric has some really good moments as well, but I don't think it quite lives up to the first two tracks or the quality of the backing track here. As can see, it's amazing. This track is really kind of where we can see modern Kanye, or at least 2010s Kanye, coalescing. The whole thing about dealing with adversity via relentless egotism, you know, it's all here. And yet the album is somehow not totally saturated by that vibe. I do like the song though. Love Lockdown is sparse with more auto-tune. I really like the keys here. And the overpowering drums that come in during the choruses, I think they really make it. Lyrically is more stuff about heartbreak. I think mostly about Kanye being alone after the breakup. And the drums at the end are, of course, phenomenal. Paranoid is a straight-ahead electropop track, and it is an absolute highlight of this album, one of my absolute favorites. In fact, I remember when I first picked up this album and really listened to it, this was one of the only songs that had me coming back again and again and again, because the rest of this album, if you're only into just the other stuff Kanye's done, the rest of this album can be a little bit not quite to your taste. I know it wasn't to mine when I first picked it up. This is another good track. I like it. It's a similar sort of lyrical vein about mistrust, you know, the breakdown of a relationship. It gets kind of nasty towards the end. There's a specific set of lyrics, you know, where Kanye is really talking down to somebody that, you know, breakup albums make me uncomfortable a lot of the time because I feel like I'm being gaslit by the artist, and this album doesn't have a lot of that, but this track definitely brings it out just a little bit. Streetlights, in my opinion, is the best song on the album, and it really drives home the fact that this album is really the last time we ever get to see Kanye the human being on full display. It's a very real track. It's about the impermanence of life and how we are all, in a sense, in a relentless forward motion that we cannot escape from, and that no matter how much we try, we can never go back to those moments, and, you know, life comes at you fast. And, you know, it's the one track on this album that I think really is about the loss of his mother. And it's a very, very heavy track. And I think it's one of his best songs. If I had to make like a top 10 Kanye tracks, this would be in it. I think this is another pretty good track. It's about the end of the relationship. I think it's specifically about Kanye finding out either that he'd just been broken up with, or perhaps more likely that his ex was cheating on him. And, you know, it's a good track, but it goes a little bit into that, you know, that I get from a lot of songs and albums about breakups. And look, there are artists who are much more guilty of this than Kanye, some of whom Kanye interrupted at the VMAs the year after this album came out. But I like this song, but I do definitely think it's a lesser track on here. It's, I believe, explicitly about ending the relationship. Lil Wayne features, and he's, you know, he's pretty good. He's not too bad on here. I know I really ragged on Lil Wayne in my graduation review, which I think I was just a little bit too harsh on that album, even though I still stand by my opinion that it's my least favorite of the classic 2000s Kanye albums, but anyway. And so we end the actual background orchestrated what have you section of the album with an atmospheric track about loneliness. I like it. For everybody that sees you to say, where's my camera? And so we end the album with what I think is technically a bonus track, Pinocchio Story, a freestyle, very similar in lyrical theme to Welcome to Heartbreak and Streetlights. I know the bulk of this was performed live. I think there might be some studio trickery involved somewhere, but I believe the majority of it is live. And that's the album. 808s is by no means the best Kanye album, but it has a pretty solid claim to being the most influential. Its minimalist electronic aesthetic has influenced many further generations, although really I think there's only one generation after Kanye, to produce emotional and introspective works of their own, even if a lot of that influence has not always been good. As I am fond of joking to friends of mine, if you deleted this album from existence, you would probably delete Drake's entire music career as well. And while I do think that one would lose something if you lost those first two albums, Does Drake even exist after 2015? I mean, I know he's on top of the charts. I know he's selling records in numbers that are about as good as you can get in this day and age, but I mean... Anyway, moving on from my unprovoked assault on the nobility of our beloved Canadian overlord and associate of Millie Bobby Brown, 808s is also a fascinating album to me because it's one of the last times we ever get to see Kanye the human being on full display, or at least a variation of him. He pops up from time to time on the later albums, But for the most part, from around the time the Taylor incident happens to really the present, what we exist with in our world is, this sort of astral projection of Kanye from his cocoon, which is erratic genius demigod Kanye, as opposed to the erratic, slightly off-putting, not the greatest person, but a human being Kanye that we had for most of the 2000s. And that, to me, I think is the most interesting part of this album going back to it. I mean, the production is masterful. It's some of his absolute best production. I think for a long time I would have said that MBDTF was the better album production-wise. But I went back to My Beautiful Dark Twisted Fantasy recently, and while I swear by that album, the mixing really bugged me this time around. So I think I might give this a slight bump from where it was. I do prefer Late Registration in terms of production sound. I think, what John Bryan helped to bring to the table and what Kanye brought to the table makes that overall his best produced album. But this is a really close second. It does a lot of stuff that I like. It can be a little bit off-putting, at least from my perspective. I'm really curious to know what somebody younger than me or my age, but super attuned to what has been happening in the hip-hop world for the last 5 years would make of this album. I kind of dropped off somewhere around 2016 and have not kept up much with new and up-and-comers since. So, give your thoughts on the off chance you watch this video. But yeah, anyway, my closing thoughts have been a little bit lackluster, but this album is most certainly not. I will be coming back next week with a Genesis review and one of the customary Halloween videos, which will come out before Halloween this year. I promise. Anyway, I hope you all have a wonderful day and enjoy your whatever time of week this video happens to come out at. When I have finally finished editing it, this thing overran its deadlines like 2.5 times. Hopefully next time that won't happen. Anyway, bye.